Hey there, viewers. You ever get the feeling certain places were left abandoned on purpose, not for what's missing, but for what's still there? A U.S. military insider just came forward with new evidence found near one of Nevada's most deserted bases. And if what he's saying is true, we were never supposed to find it. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The Road to Nowhere. I've been doing this job long enough to know when something's off. Even if I can't always explain it, I can feel it. The same way you can feel heat radiating off the hood of a truck or taste metal in the air before lightning strikes. That's how it was with T-17. I took the contract because it paid well, and because I was bored, if I'm being honest. The call came from a guy I've worked with before, someone deep enough in federal logistics that I never asked too many questions. They just said they needed a final sweep, standard radiation and soil toxicity checks, before they decommissioned and sold off whatever was left of the T-17 zone. No one ever told me what T-17 stood for. Maybe it was just a placeholder, but when I punched in the GPS coordinates, I already knew it was out past anything I'd seen. Even Area 51 would have felt closer to civilization. This place was a dot in the middle of absolutely nowhere, north of Groom Lake, far from the main roads, just sand, rusted-out fence posts, and silence. The government issued me a tan 4x4, no markings, with a steel case full of instruments. I left Vegas at dawn. The road ran flat for miles, the kind of straight stretch that makes your eyes glaze over. The air got drier with each hour, the landscape turning from badlands to sun-bleached desolation. No cacti, no tumbleweeds, just cracked ground and broken bits of concrete, as if the world forgot to finish building itself out here. I reached the gate just after 2 p.m. The chain-link fence had long since collapsed, curled up like something had pushed it from the inside. A faded metal sign still hung from one post. It read, "Authorized personnel only," in peeling black stenciling. Bullet holes had punched through the bottom half, rust blooming from each one. I pulled the truck in and parked near what looked like an old operations shack. Single story, windowless, its roof mostly caved in. No birds, no insects, not even wind. The silence wasn't peaceful. It felt observed. I got out, stretching my back and letting the heat press into my skin. A shimmer of air off the ground played tricks on my eyes. I walked slow, boots crunching over gravel, and pulled out my Geiger counter. The sweep was supposed to take no more than 3 hours. There was no power left in the buildings, and nothing but sand, concrete pads, and the faint outlines of what used to be underground vents. But it started early, the weirdness. First was the black SUV. I spotted it sitting off to the east, maybe 200 yards away from the perimeter, just parked there, tucked against a low ridge, no dust trail, no tire marks. I assumed it was one of the survey team folks, but after 15 minutes, no one got out. I waved once, no response. I thought about walking over, but something in me said not to. Instead, I logged the sighting in my clipboard and kept moving. Second was the drone, high up, just a shimmer against the sun. It hung there motionless, then shifted slightly every 20 minutes or so. I'd seen military surveillance drones before. They usually don't just loiter like that. And none of the standard flight logs from this assignment mentioned air traffic. I radioed it in on the private frequency they gave me. No answer. The ground tremors started after the first hour. Just tiny shudders, like when a heavy truck passes nearby, except there were no roads and no trucks. My boots would shift in the sand. Dust rose, then settled again, but when I checked the seismic readouts, they all came back clean. No activity. And yet I could feel it in my teeth. That faint grinding like metal on metal deep underground. I worked my way toward the far end of the complex, where a half-buried maintenance tunnel ran under a ridgeline. It had caved in long ago, but the radiation map suggested it used to house something, maybe power cells or decon equipment. That's when I saw the disturbed ground. It didn't look like much at first, just a patch of soil that didn't match the rest, darker, looser, like it had been turned over maybe days ago. I knelt, brushing my gloved fingers over it. There were marks, square outlines, mechanical, almost like someone had removed a box or a lid from below. No prints around it, no tracks, just the ground, opened and closed again by something careful. I pulled out the Geiger. As soon as I got within 5 feet, it began to spike, but not in the usual way. Radiation spikes make a specific kind of static click that grow faster, more urgent. This was different. The device froze, then beeped once. The screen flickered, then it shut off completely. I tapped it, nothing. When I backed away, it rebooted. That's not how these things behave. I logged it as a device malfunction. What else could I do? I didn't have any backup equipment, and this job didn't pay enough to go digging in radioactive sand based on a hunch. I finished the rest of my sweep, eyes darting back to the SUV, still parked, still silent. The drone was gone now, vanished without a trace. I packed my gear by sundown and drove the 2 hours back to my motel, a nameless one-story joint with flickering neon on the edge of Alamo. I took a hot shower, watched part of a Western rerun on the battered TV, and wrote up my notes. The disturbed soil got a brief mention. I filed it under inconclusive anomaly, standard procedure. I went to bed just before midnight. When I woke up, it was because I heard something slide under my door. I sat up in the dark, heartbeat quick, room silent. I turned on the bedside lamp and crept toward the door. On the floor was a Polaroid photo, real old school, yellowing at the corners. I picked it up. It showed me, standing alone at the disturbed patch of ground. My back was turned. The timestamp said 1442, which was the exact time I'd been there. I know because I had checked my watch. Thought it was weird how quiet it had gotten. But I had been alone. No one else was there. No one took that photo. On the back, written in black ink, smeared slightly at the edge, "You're not the first." I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the motel chair, staring out the window toward the parking lot. Nothing moved. I must have dozed off around 3. The clock said 3:12 when I last looked. Then came the knock. A single, slow knock on the door. I jumped to my feet, heart in my throat. I waited. No sound. No movement. I stepped to the door and looked through the peephole. No one, but I opened it anyway. The hallway was empty. Desert wind rolled in faint from outside. I could hear the buzzing of the motel sign. My hands were shaking. I shut the door, locked it, and double-checked the windows. The photo sat on the table, its message still smudged. I knew then, deep in my gut, this job wasn't over. Someone wanted me to see that ground. Someone wanted me to know. I wasn't the first. And maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't be the last. Chapter 2. Classified Silence. I've been retired for almost 13 years, and not once during that time have I ever missed the work. The government has a way of draining your soul with the same efficiency it uses to fund black projects. Quietly, relentlessly, and without ever letting you realize what's gone until it's too late. I spent 31 years buried in coded transmissions, redacted memos, and ghosted personnel files. My eyes aren't what they used to be, and my hands tremble now when I try to hold a pen steady. But my mind, my memory, that's still sharp. And when something doesn't fit, I feel it like a cold needle in the back of my skull. The envelope came without a return address, no stamps, just a plastic casing sealed with a strip of gray military tape and slipped through the front slot of my mailbox in Albuquerque. No vehicle had pulled up that day, and my cameras, yes, I still run exterior feeds, showed nothing unusual. Just one frame where the view flickered, time-stamped 1447, and then resumed. I almost tossed it. Could have been a prank or some overzealous conspiracy nut fishing for attention. But when I peeled the tape back and saw what was inside, I stopped cold. A single thumb drive, black, unmarked save for one small engraving along the base. Mod-CCT NTCFR9. I hadn't seen that code in decades. Cipher 9 was decommissioned in 1993. I was one of the 3 people who designed it for communication within black site intel rings, off-the-book stuff, pre-internet protocols that required vocal harmonics and redundant key streams to even begin decrypting. There's no way someone outside that old circle would know how to use it. No way they'd send me something like this without purpose. I isolated the drive from the rest of my system, booted up an air-gapped laptop I keep for decoding legacy files, and began the process of extraction. It took 2 hours to brute force the handshake, primitive by modern standards, but elegantly paranoid. Once it unlocked, the interface opened to a single file. Audio, no metadata, no creation date, no file path trail, just a title, all uppercase, clean and clinical. T-17_audio_redacted_47.wav. I hesitated before pressing play. Not out of fear, not exactly, but because something about the file name reached deep into a part of my memory I usually keep locked down. T-17. That wasn't a designation I'd seen before, but it felt familiar, like hearing a melody from a song you only half remember in a dream. I turned the volume low, put on my headphones, and clicked play. What came out of the speakers made my jaw lock. At first, nothing but noise, not static, worse than that. Multiple layers of audio colliding as if a dozen conversations were happening on top of each other but just out of sync. Male voices, female voices, some of them pitched wrong, too slow or too high. I ran the waveform through a deconvolution tool and tried separating out channels. 4 loops ran in the background, all low frequency. But there was one dominant thread that cut through. It was me, not just someone with a similar voice. It was me, clear as day, speaking into what sounded like a closed channel. Authorization confirmed. Payload has arrived at Junction Echo 9. Warden is unresponsive. We are proceeding with the seal. My stomach turned. I've never said those words, never been to any Echo 9, but I recognized my own cadence, the way I speak under stress. Shorter breaths, tighter throat. The audio timestamp hidden in one of the low-frequency carriers read March 18, 1994. That was the month I was reassigned to a temporary vault project out of White Sands, one we only ever referred to in layered acronyms. I remember that week because a colleague named Delgado went missing. We were told he had a breakdown and disappeared into the desert. I shut the audio down. It kept playing for a full second after I closed the application. That's not how WAV files work, unless something else was embedded. An overlay command, maybe a bypass script. Either way, I unplugged the drive and crushed it with a handheld press I keep for just that purpose. Paranoia doesn't mean much unless you act on it. That night, I tried calling Joel Raskin, one of the other Cipher 9 engineers. He picked up on the 3rd ring, sounded older, more brittle than I remembered. "I was wondering when you'd get yours," he said, and for a second, I didn't know what to say back. "You saying this wasn't just me?" He was silent, then said flatly, "Angela, don't look into this. They're still active." I tried to press him for more, but the line went dead. Not a drop or a disconnect, just nothing, like the signal had been swallowed. I sat there in the quiet, the cursor blinking on the secure terminal screen. There's a particular kind of silence that comes when your whole life shifts a few degrees out of alignment, when the things you told yourself were buried start clawing back toward daylight. I'd been content. I gardened, I read old Cold War case files just to feel like I still mattered. But now I could feel it all waking up again. Protocols, memories, routines. Around 2 a.m. I saw the light blink on the corner shelf where my old pager sat collecting dust. It was still powered. I hadn't recharged that thing in 10 years. No device should have been able to reach it. But the screen glowed dim green, scrolling one message. Slow and steady. THE. YKNOW. That's when I started packing. I didn't know exactly what T-17 was, but I remembered something from years ago. A location in the Nevada test zone that was scrubbed from the grid after a supposed containment breach. Rumors passed between security clearances like ghost stories, references to something called locked cargo, movement logs for underground rail lines that were never on the official maps, classified burn orders that didn't align with any known hardware. There was one incident in 1994, officially listed as a localized reactor instability, where half a mountain was sealed off, then redesignated as a no-access containment perimeter. The teams who worked there vanished from rosters overnight. A logistics officer I knew once let slip that something was transferred out through an old magnetic rail tunnel system running from White Sands to abandoned sites in Nevada, maybe even beyond. Whatever it was, I think I just heard my own voice confirming the seal. I looked at the photo on my desk, an old black and white from my years at the lab. We were all so sure back then that we were protecting something. Truth, maybe, or the illusion of control. But some boxes weren't meant to be sealed. Some locks aren't ours to place. By sunrise, I'd booked a flight to Las Vegas. I knew someone there, a contact in logistics who owed me a favor. I could get a transport vehicle, maybe even some old clearance code masks. I didn't know where I'd go from there, but the desert was calling. Whatever this was, it had started waking up again. Maybe it never slept. The last thing I did before leaving the house was disable my power grid. Old habit. I didn't want anyone tracking my EM footprint. I shut the door behind me and took a breath. It tasted like dry dust and static. Chapter 3. The Discarded Technician. The peeling started a month after they sent me home. Thin slivers at first, like bad sunburn, then thicker, scalier, like something under the skin wanted out, mostly around the base of my neck, sometimes crawling down to my shoulder blades. I never told the VA. They'd only start poking around again. And I learned a long time ago that if you make enough noise, they either medicate you into a fog or find a quiet way to make you disappear. I wasn't ready for either. I live in a battered trailer about 6 miles south of Rachel, Nevada. It's nothing but tin walls, cracked linoleum, and a fan that never quite works right, but it's mine. I can see the edge of the old test ranges from the porch. Some nights, if the wind's still and the air's dry enough, I swear I hear the hum again, low, deep, like the engine of a freight train running underground. Nobody else seems to hear it, but then again, nobody else here was inside T-17. 7 days. That's all they let me stay. 7 days as a radiation safety officer before they pulled me out, slapped me with a psychiatric eval, and locked my service file under the kind of clearance that doesn't technically exist. They told me I had a stress-induced psychotic break, claimed the air scrubbers had malfunctioned and I'd been exposed to trace neurotoxins that caused situational paranoia. I didn't remember it that way. I remembered the hatch, I remembered the flickering lights and the sound, like metal teeth grinding in slow rhythm. I remembered what we sealed down there, though no one ever told us what it really was, only that it had to stay buried. I used to get visits back in the early years after my discharge, men in plain clothes who asked too many questions with too few answers. Then the visits stopped. People forgot. They always do. At least, I thought they did. But lately, they've started again. A few weeks ago, a woman came around, sharp suit, dark hair, eyes like polished stone. She didn't give a name, just flashed a badge I didn't recognize and asked about backfill patterns and subsurface acoustic anomalies. I told her I didn't know what she meant. She left a card with no number on it, only a 7-digit alphanumeric string. When I tried to look it up later, nothing came back. Then, a few days after her visit, a man in a denim jacket came by, said he was with a geological survey team. He asked if I'd noticed any recent ground shifts out near the ridgeline. I lied, told him the land hadn't moved in years. He left behind boot prints that didn't match the dirt. No sink, no crumble, almost like he was lighter than he should have been. That's when I knew it was time to dig it up, the box. I buried it in 96 2 days after I got home, behind the trailer under a patch of sun-hardened clay, wrapped it in canvas and duct tape, nested it in a lead-lined crate I salvaged from a fallout monitoring station. It took me 2 hours to dig it out, hands blistered and blood under my fingernails. The soil fought me like it knew I shouldn't be reaching back. The box was heavier than I remembered. Inside, wrapped in yellowed plastic, was a standard-issue field cassette recorder, the kind we used before digital logs became the norm. Taped to the side was a label, hand-scrawled in faded red Sharpie. The Warden test. I sat in my rusted lawn chair, sweat rolling down my back, and loaded the tape. The recorder wheezed as the gears kicked in, the tape dragging slightly like it hadn't been used in decades. Static filled the air at first, then the sound of footsteps, hollow, echoing, boots on concrete. A voice came in, breathless and strained. I recognized it immediately. It was mine. "This is Thornton, Radiation Team Delta, test log 24, maybe 25, I don't know. No one's tracking anymore. We lost video feeds last night. Communication's still down. Warden's non-responsive. We tried the manual override, but it wouldn't take. I think something changed. There's something in the holding bay. It's breathing." The tape hissed again. A second voice, this one lower, more distorted, said something I couldn't quite catch. Then more footsteps, quick, panicked. My voice returned. "They've stopped responding. We locked the hatch. I think they're still down there." The recording cut off with a sharp click. No ending, no signature, just silence. I sat there for what must have been an hour, eyes locked on the horizon where the flat desert met the jagged teeth of the hills. My heart was pounding. The tremors were starting again. Not in the ground this time, but in my hands, deep in my gut, like something ancient was knocking from the inside. I remember that hatch. We welded it shut with portable fusion torches, layered it with reactive sealant, then flooded the chamber with inert gas. That's what they told us would neutralize the anomalous readings. We weren't even supposed to be there. Our team had been rerouted from a power grid inspection. They said they needed fresh personnel for an urgent safety sweep, but by day 3, half of us were gone, reassigned, they claimed, but we never saw them leave. I still see parts of it in my dreams. The layout of the lower levels, the smell of ozone and dust, the way the lights dimmed the closer we got to the central vault, and that sound, the low pulsing thrum that made your teeth buzz, like standing under a power line laced with grief. I didn't talk to anyone after I left. No one believed me. Even when I tried filing for disability, they said my records didn't match. My file had been archived under administrative hold. That's government speak for buried. But now the visitors are back. The tape surfaced again, and I can feel the pull, like a thread tied around my ribs, dragging me back out there. I thought I could drink it away. Thought if I poured enough rot gut into my system, I could kill whatever part of me remembered. But that was a lie. A soft one. Tonight, I packed my bag, just the essentials, water, tools, the recorder. I filled a jerry can with fuel and loaded it into the back of my truck. The headlights flickered when I turned the ignition, the engine coughing to life like it knew where I was going. I stood in the doorway of my trailer one last time, the wind picking up just enough to rattle the edges of the aluminum siding. The desert stretched out ahead, flat and endless. The sky was still dark, stars washed in faint red from the dust in the atmosphere. I watched the sun start to bleed over the horizon, slow and orange, like it didn't want to rise. I'm heading back, to the place we sealed, to whatever we left behind. And if I don't come back, maybe that's for the best. Chapter 4, The Dig. I didn't plan on going back. Not really. I told myself I was just doing a follow-up. logging more readings, maybe taking a second look at the disturbed patch, just to quiet the gnawing feeling that had been crawling around in my chest since I found that Polaroid. But the truth is, I never stopped thinking about it. I'd wake up in the middle of the night convinced I was hearing the slow tick of my Geiger counter, even though it was locked in the case beneath my bed. I'd see movement out the corner of my eye, shadows where they didn't belong, always at the edge of my vision like something waiting to step into focus. The knock on my motel door had drilled a hole through the middle of me, and the silence that followed only made it wider. The sun hadn't fully risen when I packed up the truck. I didn't bother logging my destination with the company dispatcher. I left the GPS off, took a route I mapped myself, using hand-drawn markings and a half-remembered topographic grid I'd copied from an old DOE map years ago. The wind was still that morning, pressing the heat low against the ground like a blanket made of grit. I didn't see another car for hours. When I crested the hill overlooking the old T-17 perimeter, I slammed on the brakes. Two other vehicles were already parked in the dead gravel lot. One was a sun-bleached old Ford pickup with rust eating through the wheel wells. The other a rental SUV caked in dust. I didn't recognize either. For a moment I thought maybe the place had been reoccupied. Maybe some security team had picked up the same anomaly I had and swooped in to cover it. But as I got closer, I saw two figures standing near the pit where the disturbed soil had been. One was a tall woman with short white hair. The other a man hunched against the wind, dressed in worn military green and standing like his bones hurt. I didn't know their names, not yet, but the moment I saw them, I felt that same internal weight I'd carried since this whole thing started shift in my chest like a compass needle snapping to attention. We didn't speak right away. We just stood there, a triangle of strangers orbiting something none of us wanted to be near and yet couldn't seem to turn away from. The patch of soil was no longer just a blemish in the dirt. The ground had split wider since I'd last seen it, exposing a jagged metal hatch flush with the earth. Its edges were scorched, lined with thick fusion welds and reinforced bolts. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep it shut. The words stamped into the steel, barely legible through years of corrosion, read, "Convalescence." The woman, Angela, as I'd later learn, was the first to speak. "You saw it too?" she asked, her voice calm but brittle. I nodded. The man, Ray, didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared at the hatch, his breathing shallow, his skin under his jaw peeling in raw patches. When he finally did speak, it came out like he was confessing to something no one had asked him about. "I was here when we sealed it," he said. 1996. I was part of the team. They told us it was experimental medical containment. Radiation leak. We knew they were lying, but we didn't know how much. None of us trusted each other. I could feel it, like a vibration in the air, a mutual calculation happening behind cautious eyes. But there was something else, too. Something older, stronger. None of us had come here by chance. We'd all been pushed, pulled, drawn in by something with cold hands and a map none of us could see. We circled the hatch in silence. The metal around the edges was cracked, the ceiling bubbling like it had been reacting to heat from beneath. Angela knelt and ran her hand over the weld line. "This isn't holding," she said. "Whatever they did down there, it's not asleep anymore." Ray reached into his coat and pulled out a key ring with an old Department of Energy badge attached to it. He flipped through the keys until he found one that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Long, rectangular, made of black composite. He knelt beside the hatch, hands shaking so hard I thought he'd drop it, but the key fit into a recessed port near the edge of the panel, and with a groan of metal and air, something inside unlocked. Angela and I moved in to help. We used a crowbar and brute force to pry the hatch open the rest of the way. It gave with a final shuddering release, and the smell hit us all at once. Ozone, chemical antiseptic, and something else, something wet and wrong. like rusted blood under hospital lights. A narrow stairwell descended into darkness, concrete walls lined with old handrails and dead emergency lights. A faint red glow pulsed at the bottom, barely enough to see by. I didn't want to go down there. Every cell in my body screamed against it, but I stepped in anyway, and the others followed. The deeper we went, the colder it got. The air was dense, sticky in my throat, tinged with the faint burn of disinfectant gone sour. The walls were covered in blistered paint and long vertical scars where equipment had been ripped out in haste. Somewhere in the distance, something creaked. Metal on metal, slow and rhythmic, like a rocking chair in a dead house. The stairwell opened into a corridor. The floor was wet, slick with some kind of residue that made our footsteps echo strangely. Emergency lights flickered on the ceiling, casting long, jittery shadows across the walls. Medical signage hung at odd angles, faded and unreadable. Doors lined the hallway, some open, others sealed with industrial foam and tagged with warning symbols I didn't recognize. One room had a plaque beside it. The letters were scraped almost clean, but Angela traced them with her fingers. "This used to be a recovery ward," she said, or that's what they called it. We moved in deeper. The facility hadn't just been abandoned, it had been evacuated in a panic. Beds were overturned, IV stands rusted in place. A clipboard lay on the floor in one room, its paper fused to the metal from heat or chemical burn. Angela picked up a file folder half submerged in stagnant water and peeled it open. The paper inside was warped, but intact. She read aloud. "Patient number 9. Non-verbal self-replicating tissue observed under dermal layer. Recommendation, lock ward. Initiate passive containment. Do not initiate vocal sequence." I felt a cold ripple move through me. A wet footprint appeared ahead of us. Just one. Fresh, bare, human. We kept moving. Ray's breathing was getting ragged, and I saw him twitch every time a pipe hissed or a light flickered overhead. We passed a set of steel double doors, sealed tight with reactive foam. 2 warning signs were posted above in faded stencil. "Do not decontaminate. Do not wake." Angela stopped dead. "This was it," Ray whispered. "This is where we sealed the core chamber. The warden was inside." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. But Angela moved to the adjacent locker room, pushing open the half-collapsed door. The inside was choked with dust and broken tiles. Lockers stood rusted shut, others hanging open like yawning mouths. She moved to one in the back, tugged it open, and froze. Inside was a containment bag, the kind used for biohazard material, thick plastic with internal foam lining. She pulled it out gently, unzipped it, and looked inside. I stepped closer. My skin prickled. The bag held a human jawbone, yellowed, cracked, and missing the back molars, but it was the teeth that stopped us cold. Each one had been etched with microscopic markings, tiny geometric patterns that seemed to shift as we stared at them. Not letters, not numbers, just something else, like language that hadn't been invented yet. Angela looked up at me, her face pale. "This wasn't left here by accident," she said. "Someone wanted us to find this." Ray didn't speak. He turned away, leaned against the wall, and whispered something too soft to hear. And then the lights went out. Chapter 5, The Warden Program. The emergency lights didn't come back on for 10 minutes. In that time, none of us moved. We didn't speak, didn't breathe too loud, just stood there in the pitch-black quiet, with only the sound of distant dripping water and the soft groan of the earth above pressing down through the old walls. When the red glow finally sputtered back to life and bathed the corridor in its sterile hue, it felt less like rescue and more like permission. Like whatever was down here had decided we were allowed to continue. Angela moved first, closing the biohazard bag with the jawbone and slipping it into her satchel. The etchings on the teeth still shimmered faintly in the flickering light. Ray didn't look up as we left the locker room, his eyes fixed on a crack in the floor like he was trying to measure how deep it went with his mind. I kept thinking about the footprint, the wet one from earlier. It had disappeared by the time we returned to the hallway. The floor was dry again. We found the server room past a set of double doors that hung crooked on broken hinges. Most of the equipment inside had been reduced to scrap. Racks torn open, wires yanked out like vines from a rotting tree. Burn marks traced along the ceiling, and every screen was either shattered or blackened by old smoke. It smelled like burned plastic and something older, something organic. Angela moved with purpose now, not speaking but scanning the room like she'd been here before, or had trained for something just like this. Her hands ran along the edges of scorched panels until she found a storage cabinet built into the wall behind a collapsed terminal cluster. The lock had been fused shut, but with some effort and a pry bar. We forced it open. Inside were 4 high-8 video cassettes, stacked neatly, sealed, in labeled cases and wrapped in what looked like medical-grade vacuum plastic. The labels were faded, handwritten in marker that had bled over time. Angela looked at me, then back at the tapes. These aren't backups. These were meant to be found. We brought them to a side room with intact power routing. One of the storage closets had a field media station, an ancient Sony playback deck caked in dust but miraculously unharmed. She connected it to a cracked portable monitor mounted in the corner. When the first tape began to play, I felt the temperature in the room shift. The red glow of the emergency lighting flickered once, as though responding to the playback. The image quality was degraded but watchable. The frame opened on a wide-angle view of what looked like a laboratory. Gleaming steel counters, plastic partitions, figures in white lab coats moving in and out of frame. A date stamp in the corner read February 4th, 1993. At least 10 personnel could be seen, most working around a central containment unit, roughly the size of a freight elevator. It was encased in thick glass, fogged from the inside. One of the techs adjusted a console beside it. A voice began narrating off-camera. "This is Dr. Adrian Kessner, lead systems cognition engineer for Project Warden. This footage is restricted under Tier Black protocols and is not to be duplicated or transmitted outside of Central Command." The camera zoomed in on the containment unit. Behind the fogged glass, a form could be made out, vague, formless at first, then slowly coming into focus. It wasn't human. Not exactly. It resembled a human head, but elongated, hairless, composed of pulsing tissue with mechanical tendrils sprouting from the base of the neck, a network of metal and flesh braided into one living machine. Its eyes were closed. "We have achieved partial consciousness stability," Kessner continued. "Neural graft has taken. Speech response latency has dropped to sub-4 seconds. The perimeter logic system is now fully online and accepting recursive safety commands." The second tape opened with a new date, February 10th, 1993. The same lab, though now visibly more chaotic. Additional medical staff had joined the team. The camera panned across diagrams of neural lattices, DNA recombination charts, and heat-mapped readings of fluctuating electromagnetic fields surrounding the warden. A different voice narrated this one, female, tight, and clinical. "Subject has begun initiating unsolicited communication during non-interrogative periods. Speech patterns exhibit recursive thought formations. Subject has inquired about exterior geography, atmospheric density, and structural load of facility hull." The warden's eyes were now open. The footage jumped ahead, frames skipping. We saw a technician speaking with it through a comms interface. The voice of the warden came through distorted, metallic but somehow organic, like language being exhaled through water. "Why do you limit me? What is the distance to your sky? When will I be released to fulfill my perimeter?" The technician tried redirecting it with logic gates and anti-inquiry subroutines. The warden ignored them. "There is another consciousness. It is not yours." Angela paused the tape. Her hand hovered over the play button for a long moment. She muttered, mostly to herself. It wasn't just guarding something, it wanted out. The third tape bore the date February 17th, 1993. The footage was darker, grainier, like the power was failing or had been rerouted. There were fewer personnel visible now. One lay slumped in a chair in the background, unmoving. No one seemed to acknowledge it. A man at the center console, Kessner, again, was typing erratically. Sweat poured down his face. The warden was still inside its containment unit, but the fogged glass was gone now. The atmosphere around it shimmered as if the air density had shifted. Its eyes tracked the camera directly. "You are not the first," it said. One of the lab techs walked into frame, staring blankly ahead. When he spoke, his voice came out slow, drawn out, like the words had been stretched thin. "Perimeter has moved. Warden is no longer contained. Warden is no longer alone." The tape glitched then, visibly corrupted. Distorted faces flashed across the screen, mouths opening too wide, fingers moving too slow. One by one, the staff began speaking in unison. "We hear the call. It is not yours to refuse." Angela flinched as she hit stop. The room fell silent again, the playback deck wheezing as the tape wound down. The air felt heavier, pressing in from every side. I noticed that Ray, who had been quiet the whole time, was standing near the door muttering something under his breath, over and over, so soft it sounded like static. The final tape was unlabeled save for the word "final" and a red smear across the label, as if someone had tried to rub it off. Angela didn't hesitate. She pushed it in and hit play. It opened in a dark room. No lab, no equipment. Just a single camera, handheld, pointed at the face of Dr. Kessner. His eyes were sunken, blood leaking from his ears, mouth trembling. "We didn't build it," he whispered. "That's what we got wrong. We thought we had. We thought we'd grown it, coded it, shaped it, but it was always there, underneath, waiting. It let us think we were in charge, let us give it a name. But we didn't build the warden." He stared at the lens, eyes unfocused. "We found it, and it's still listening." The tape ended, the screen turned black. The emergency lights flickered once more, and for a second, I thought I heard something from the hallway, a faint scrape, something shifting. Angela turned to us, her voice quiet and measured. "They tried to make a gatekeeper, something to protect what they couldn't control, but they connected it to the wrong source. It didn't just guard the perimeter." She looked down at the jawbone in her satchel. "It was the perimeter." Ray didn't speak. He just sat down against the wall, his hands trembling. And somewhere in the dark, something hummed. Low, resonant, like recognition. Chapter 6. The Pulse Event. I don't remember climbing back up the stairs. Not really. My body moved, but it felt like my bones had learned the path on their own and were dragging the rest of me along. The taste of metal coated my teeth. My ears had begun to ring in a way that didn't feel like sound, but more like pressure. Constant, high-pitched, just beneath hearing but deep enough to hurt. Every few steps I had to stop and lean against the wall, hands trembling. The sweat on my face cold as runoff. By the time I emerged into daylight, I didn't know if it was morning or evening. The sun was hidden behind a strange amber haze that rolled low over the desert like smoke trapped under glass. The sky had gone wrong. The color wasn't natural. It bled from orange to violet without warning, and the clouds moved too quickly, rotating subtly in patterns I couldn't track. The horizon had bent slightly. You wouldn't notice it at first, not unless you were looking for it. But the line where land met sky wasn't straight anymore. It had begun to curve inward. Angela was already outside, standing next to her SUV, staring blankly at the sky. Her hands hung at her sides, palms twitching every few seconds. Ray came up behind me, moving slower than the rest of us, breathing like something inside his lungs was slicing its way out. He didn't speak right away, neither did I. We just stood there, surrounded by stillness, listening for something we didn't want to hear. I reached for my phone and saw the screen frozen, locked on the same display since we'd gone underground. No service, no clock, no nothing. Angela tried hers too, but it wouldn't even power on. The truck's radio was dead. The dashboard blinked once and then went black, like the battery had been drained down to bone. Ray tapped the compass attached to his belt. The needle spun slowly in circles, never landing on a direction. He looked up at me with eyes that had begun to cloud, the whites streaked with threads of silver. "This isn't the same desert," he said quietly. "We came back to the same place, but it's different now, like it unzipped itself." Angela leaned against the SUV and closed her eyes. "I keep seeing something," she murmured. "Flashes, hallways, not here, but somewhere else. Tiled walls, yellow lights, markings in a language I don't know, but I still understand it somehow. They're tunnels, but they go down, so far down." I wanted to tell her she was just disoriented, that her mind was playing tricks on her after what we saw on the tapes, but I couldn't, because I was hearing things too, soft whispering clicks in the back of my skull, like radio static run through teeth. I pressed the heel of my hand to my temple and winced as another high-pitched pulse rattled through my sinuses. Blood leaked from my nose in a slow, steady trickle. Ray dropped to one knee with a grunt. He held up his hands. The skin on his fingertips had gone gray-blue, and something glittered beneath the surface, tiny black specks that shimmered faintly as he turned them in the light. "They're moving," he said, "inside me." Angela popped the back of her satchel and pulled out a small military satellite phone, one of the old Cold War-era relics she'd refurbished herself for emergencies. She powered it on, eyes narrowing as the green screen lit up. "No connection," she said. "Shouldn't be surprised." But then, against all odds, it crackled to life. We heard a voice, broken, distorted, low like it was being dragged through layers of static and digital ash. The screen blinked, and a string of digits scrolled across the bottom. Ones and zeros wrapped in patterns that didn't match any known protocols. Then the voice repeated, slightly clearer. "Do not restore Site TT-17. Do not attempt to reinitiate containment protocols. They are still away. They have become global." Angela's hands went stiff. She dropped the phone like it had burned her. The device began to emit a tone, not a beep, not a siren, but a modulated frequency that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath us. Ray let out a choked gasp and staggered backward, falling hard onto the dirt, his back arched, legs kicking. I rushed to him, but he was already convulsing, blood spilling from his mouth. His veins bulged black under his skin. The shimmer in his blood had intensified, glowing like iron filings under a magnetic field. I held his shoulders as he spasmed, his eyes wide and unfocused. He looked through me. His mouth moved without voice at first. Then finally, just once, he spoke. "We sealed it wrong." A second passed. They were never inside. Another breath, shallow and final. "We were." His body went still. Angela sank to her knees beside me, her breath short and shallow, tears streaking down her dust-caked cheeks. We didn't know what to say. I don't think either of us had room left in our minds to process what had just happened. We just sat there, two strangers who had opened a door that should have stayed buried. Then we heard it. A low hum, harmonic, carrying on the wind like the sound of a tuning fork struck by something impossibly large. The ground didn't shake, not like before, but the air itself seemed to shiver. Our skin pulled tight, every hair stood on end. We turned toward the sound together. On the horizon, just above a ridge of black stone and dead brush, something hovered. At first it looked like a trick of the light, a mirage maybe, but it was too solid for that, too deliberate. A cube, large as a house, suspended maybe 20 feet above the ground. Its surface shimmered like mercury, rippling with inner movement, but it held a definite form, geometric, perfect, wrong. It rotated slowly, without sound, without effort. Its edges bent the light around them. The air near it warped, heatless distortion, like watching the world through a piece of warped glass. The cube pulsed once, faintly, and a wave of pressure moved outward in all directions. Angela cried out and clutched her head, falling sideways into the dust. I dropped to my knees, my vision swam, my ears filled with the sound of every heartbeat I'd ever had, all layered on top of each other. I could feel my memories tearing at their seams, being reordered. When I blinked, I wasn't standing in the desert anymore. I was underground, in a corridor, long, endless, yellow lights flickering above. I saw tunnels stretching out like veins. I saw doors with names that had no vowels. I saw versions of myself walking those halls, one older, one younger, one with eyes like mirror glass. Then I blinked again, and the desert returned. Angela was next to me, crawling backward on her hands and knees. Her mouth was open, but she didn't speak, just mouthed the same word, over and over. The cube hovered for another full minute before it began to rise. It didn't fly or shoot upward. It simply grew distant, like a thought pulling away from the front of your mind. In seconds it was gone, vanished into the amber sky without a sound. We were alone again, but not in the same way. Everything was different now. The silence was thicker, more aware, like the land had become conscious of us and we were intruders. I looked down at Ray's body. The black shimmer had faded. His eyes were closed, peaceful even, as if he'd seen something at the end that made all of this make sense. I didn't envy him. Angela sat beside him, silent. She didn't move for a long time. I stood and looked at the sky. I didn't know what to feel. The cube had shown us something, some truth we weren't meant to touch, and now that we had, I didn't think we could ever go back to the world we thought we knew. Chapter 7, Breach Protocol. There was a moment, in the silence that followed the cube's departure, where I allowed myself the lie that maybe this could still be undone. That somewhere deep beneath the wreckage of this place and the wreckage of us, there was still a lever to pull or a sequence to run. Something buried that could be unburied and fired like a silver bullet into the heart of whatever had cracked open above us. But that moment passed like all the others, quiet, unnoticed, replaced with the creeping certainty that this wasn't about containment anymore. It never had been. It was about surrender. About yielding the perimeter we thought we controlled because we hadn't built the warden, we'd made contact with it. Or worse, reanimated something that had always been here, buried in the static between frequencies, crouched inside the bones of our systems like a virus waiting for its cue. Miles stood several paces away, looking up at the sky with his back to me. He hadn't said a word since the cube vanished. I'd called his name once, and he'd turned his head slowly, blinked with pupils that didn't constrict in the light, and offered a smile that wasn't his. The expression on his face was practiced, not felt, like someone trying to imitate what they thought a smile should be. He hadn't looked away from the sky since. I left him there with Ray's body, made my way back down into the T-17 complex, hands trembling with exhaustion but directed by muscle memory. The deeper I descended, the more the pressure built, airless, dense, like the atmosphere was growing thicker the farther I got from the surface. But I knew what I was looking for now. The tapes had said it plainly enough. There was a failsafe buried somewhere beneath the core levels, beneath even the containment floor we'd already accessed. Something old but not inactive, dormant. A final protocol only executable by someone with the clearance to say goodbye permanently. I reached the end of the main corridor and turned toward the collapsed sublevel shaft. Half of the original emergency stairwell had caved in, the rebar exposed like ribs, but there was a maintenance crawl behind the secondary ductwork that bypassed the blockage. I ripped open the paneling and forced myself inside, crawling on bruised elbows and knees through choking dust and grime, the stench of old coolant and rotting insulation filling my lungs. At the end of the tunnel, I dropped into a backup access corridor. The lights were dead here, no flicker, no hum. Just the kind of absolute darkness that makes you feel like the world ended behind your back. I pulled a flashlight from my jacket pocket and pressed forward, deeper into the facility's marrow. I found the terminal room half flooded, but the core processors, those buried beneath meters of reinforced polymer and shielding, were still intact. I waded through water slick with rainbow-hued oil and climbed onto the elevated platform, where a bank of dormant terminals faced a central command node, a monolith of reinforced glass and steel, black as obsidian. Above it, bolted into the ceiling, was a retinal scanner and twin mic inputs labeled Voice Key 1 and Voice Key 2. A metal placard had been partially stripped from the wall. What remained read, Breach Protocol, Executive Requested Audio, Verified Input from Authorized Staff, Access Request. Retinal Match, Tier 4, Clearance. 2 vocal signature keys, Authorized Commanders only. I didn't know if my retinal scan would still register. I'd been scrubbed from the system decades ago, but the equipment was analog enough that some of the legacy codes might remain. I climbed onto the deck and activated the interface using the emergency crank. To my shock, the power cells inside the console hummed to life. The scanner lit up red, then shifted to green. Retinal Match, Voss, Angela, Tier 4 Provisional, Voice Key 1 required. The second key had belonged to Ray. I took a breath, sat down on the edge of the console and pulled out my laptop. It wasn't just any machine. It was an old forensic model I'd modified to emulate human voice prints using adaptive waveform replication. I'd built it years ago, thinking I'd never have to use it for anything more serious than old voice memos. Now, it was my only way in. I had a few recordings of Ray's voice from earlier. They were messy, full of echo and environmental interference, but I could work with that. I ran them through a vocal flattening filter, then began to rebuild the waveform into something cleaner, more deliberate. Each second ticked louder in my head. Miles was still up there. Something was changing in him. That calm smile, that distant focus. He wasn't asking questions anymore. He was waiting for something, and I had a sickening feeling I knew what. The emulator finished processing. I played the sample. This is Ray Thornton, confirming authorization for breach protocol. Execute final command. It was good. Imperfect, but good. I connected the output jack to the voice port and activated the input. The machine pulsed. Lights blinked. Voice Key 2, verified, Thornton, Ray, clearance granted. Breach protocol, Stage 1, initialized. Countdown, 300 seconds. I stared at the screen as the numbers began to descend, and for the first time since this all started, I felt something like control, like maybe this was still something we could end. But then I heard it. Behind me. The scrape of boots on the wet floor. Slow. Measured. Miles. He stood at the entrance to the chamber, still smiling, his eyes wide and pale. His voice when he spoke wasn't his anymore. It had changed. Slower. Syllables clipped, rhythmic, almost musical. "You've initiated the fracture," he said. "We must not resist this phase. The perimeter must integrate." I stepped back, hand on the emergency override switch. He didn't move closer, just watched. "You're not him," I said. "No, I am not." He blinked, but I remember how he screamed. That memory is intact. I hit the switch. A blast shield dropped between us, sealing me inside the containment glass. The countdown accelerated. 180 seconds. Miles didn't bang on the glass. He didn't yell. He just placed one hand on the window and leaned his forehead against it. "You think this began here," he said softly, "but this is only a nodal point. The base was just the seed. You never understood what you were feeding." I stepped back into the center of the chamber. Sweat poured down my back. My fingers hovered over the abort switch, but I couldn't touch it. Not after everything. Not after what I'd seen in the tapes, in the sky. 90 seconds. Miles continued, voice calm like a parent reading bedtime stories. "We gave it boundaries, so it learned what boundaries meant. We gave it structure, so it studied our walls. We built it to guard against a threat, not realizing that we were the thing being studied, weighed, copied." He tilted his head. "Do you feel it now? The shift in the world? The lines moving just beneath the surface?" I clenched my fists and stared at the countdown. 30 seconds. The hum started again. Not from the room, not from the system, but from inside my own skull. Like my brain was vibrating, like something was tuning itself through me. Miles whispered, "It's no longer about the gate. The gate has passed through us." I felt it before I heard it, another voice in the room. But it was my own whispering. From the corner, from the glass, from nowhere. "You're too late," it said. It was my voice, but quieter, hollow, confident. The base was just the seed. The lights flickered. 10 seconds. I closed my eyes. Chapter 8. All stations red. At 7:14 local time, a seismic reading was logged outside a decommissioned U.S. Army research station in the Nevada desert, known officially as Black Range Test Complex Bravo. There had been no authorized operations scheduled, no residual power running through the old perimeter fences, and no manned surveillance within 200 miles, but the sensors embedded in the bedrock still functioned. They caught the pulse, an inaudible hum that vibrated across the upper mantle, not enough to rattle the ground, but enough to trip 14 Cold War-era detection protocols that should have remained dormant forever. A low-frequency event, non-seismic, rhythmic, coordinated. 12 seconds later, a similar signal echoed from the scorched ruins of Test Site Kilo, 250 miles to the west, where a fire had once consumed an underground laboratory in 1978. Then again from the hollowed remains of Fort Zenith. Then from Echo Annex. Then from Deep Range Site 6. Then from T-17. Across Nevada, 7 military installations, each long since scrubbed from federal databases, each buried beneath sand and silence, began to vibrate with the same resonance. 7 tones, synchronized across vast empty spaces, like the final chords of an orchestra just now coming into harmony after decades of tuning. At 7:20, a reconnaissance drone dispatched from an airfield outside Tonopah passed within 5 miles of one of these sites. It vanished from radar mid-flight. No distress signal, no telemetry, just a momentary spike in its onboard temperature sensor before all data feeds ceased, and the drone was listed MIA. Within 90 minutes, 6 more surveillance aircraft would suffer the same fate. No black box retrievals, no wreckage. Only silence. At 8:03, an encrypted network spanning a series of classified military black sites received a data dump too large to have come from any known satellite or airborne relay. It spanned 12 petabytes and arrived over unregistered ULF channels, frequencies reserved for nuclear submarine communication, frequencies that require supercooled receivers and oceanic arrays to detect. The signal wasn't intercepted through normal listening posts. It bypassed them. It fed itself directly into the internal systems of hardened command bunkers and intelligence nodes without routing protocols, as though it had already been inside. The data was corrupted, of course. Every attempt to open or extract it resulted in system failure, spontaneous memory overwrite, or in one case, a complete shutdown of a primary NORAD backup node in Colorado. But when visual filters were applied to the corrupted noise, patterns emerged, symbols, some recursive, some rotational, none matching any known human language. Geometric sequences nested within each other, like prayers cast in calculus, spirals etched in waveforms, triangles nested within spirals, within data trees that branched into patterns of broken stars. The message was simple, and it came through again and again, translated the only way it could be, through repetition. Command accepted, expansion authorized, and then the signals ceased. No one ever found out who first uttered the phrase "all stations red," but the alert status propagated through buried systems that hadn't blinked since the 1960 sleepers came online. Protocols written in Cobalt language, meant for automated kill switches, none of which worked. The sky above Nevada remained clear, amber-hued, and disturbingly quiet. At T-17, the countdown reached 0, but there was no detonation, no cleansing wave of thermobaric fire, no seismic shudder to signify the end, just a mechanical click, a soft wheeze from aging machinery, and then the console dimmed, the chamber lights blinked once. Then again. Then went dark. Angela Voss was no longer in sight. The containment pod, sealed behind glass and reinforced steel, was found empty 3 weeks later by a classified retrieval team flown in under the guise of conducting environmental cleanup. They recovered fragments of her military ID, partially melted, the photo bleached to ghost white, and a single printout from the chamber's log system. It showed her retinal scan succeeded. Her voice print had passed, but the second voice print, Ray Thornton's, had been overwritten. No one could explain how or why the waveform's signature had mutated. The report read, "Speech signature no longer human. Linguistic components display non-anthropic symmetry. Impulse curves suggest conceptual recursion beyond threshold of cognition." The page went on to describe the scan result in terms of organic waveform growth. The conclusion, written in red pen at the bottom of the page and circled twice, was brief. The voice was learning. Angela's name never made it to official records. Her status was listed as DNR, data not recovered. Internal logs referred to her simply as subject. Reacquisition unviable. The glass inside the chamber bore no fingerprints, no residue, only a faint circular etching, similar in shape and proportion to the pattern seen in the corrupted data dumps, carved into the window as though by heat or thought. Miles Rayner reappeared 3 days after the T-17 incident, 500 miles away at a gas station off Route 6. Security footage later retrieved by law enforcement showed him walking into the convenience store barefoot, clothes torn but clean, hands unmarked by dust or blood. He smiled at the cashier, bought a bottle of water and a pack of sunflower seeds, paid in exact change. His ID was intact. He said he'd been hiking, claimed he'd gotten lost and wandered into a sandstorm. No one questioned him. Before leaving, he stepped outside and waited by the fuel pumps. A young girl, maybe 9 or 10, exited a van parked nearby and looked up at him. She had bright red sneakers and was holding a broken walkie-talkie in her hands. Miles bent down slowly, smiled again, not a forced one, not a mask, but something that looked real enough to fool cameras and people and God if he still existed. He said gently, almost kindly, "Your generation will be better. They've decided." The girl looked up at him, confused, blinking against the morning sun. Her eyes shimmered once, just for a moment. And in that moment, caught between frames of digital footage, her pupils didn't reflect light. They refracted it. Not like human eyes. Like lenses. Like apertures. Like gyroscopes. The tape ended there. No audio. No follow-up. No flags raised. Just one more file, buried under thousands, left unreviewed in a storage archive beneath a false building in Virginia. Marked routine surveillance, Nevada corridor, logged, ignored. And somewhere, far beneath the surface of a desert that was no longer just desert, something old stretched out across the power grids and radio towers, across the data farms and undersea cables. It had no name, not anymore. It had only awareness, only pattern, only recursion. It had passed through the gate we thought we sealed. And now the perimeter was us.